Hi, welcome to Edward Box Guitar Tuition. So, yesterday we had the sad news that John Sykes had passed away. And I just wanted to do a little tribute, really, talk about someone who's one of my favourite players of all time. I first discovered him in the Tigers of Pantang, like a lot of people did. I was just a little kid, about 10 years old. And I'd been exposed to Van Halen, Randy Rhoads, Michael Schenker, Uli Roth, Gary Moore a little bit, Frank Marino, players like that. And John Sykes just fitted right in with 1981. If you look at the great records and great playing then, he absolutely nailed it on Spellbound and on Crazy Nights. There's two Tigers albums that released at that time. They also had a Tigers of Pantang concert on TV, and I seem to recall being able to watch him playing in that. I've checked it out. Just such a cool looking guy, you know, the black leather pants, the black shirt, the Les Paul with a cool chrome scratch plate and a long blonde flowing hair. He absolutely stood out as the preeminent British guitar hero at that point, the new kid on the block who could duke it out with his American counterparts and Irish ones. That's the way I would see it historically now. Then of course he went to Thin Lizzy. I still remember, hearing Cold Sweat for the first time. Just been blown away by that song, the riff, the top pinch harmonics he did. And of course the solo, absolute face melting. Kind of like Gary Moore on Speed in a way. Still such a great lead break. And then on that album, Thunder of Lightning, he did some great work. Lovely solo on Holy War. Absolutely brilliant on that. This is the one. It's Babe, I'm Gonna Leave You. Forget the title now, sorry. But he really, he kind of upscaled Lizzy. I know some people are critical of him making it too metal. But Lizzy needed to kick up the butt after sort of two fairly flaccid albums. All had some great tracks on Chinatown and Renegade. And Thunder and Lightning was certainly a much better send-off than I would have had. Of course, he played on the Life album, Thin Lizzy, the live one. I think a lot of people like to hear a remix of that. And then on to Whitesnake. He did a couple of tracks, John, the remix of Slide It In, but really, of course, it was a 1987 album, so it's a strange sort of tale that him and Coverdale bedded down, and the album took what seemed like a very long time then, due to David Coverdale having bad throat problems and needing an operation. I still remember the first time I heard Still of the Night. I couldn't believe it was Whitesnake, to be honest. It didn't sound like the Whitesnake I was aware of before that. Obviously, there's criticisms about that. But again, the proof of the pudding's in the eating. You have to look at what Sykes was able to do. He injected the prerequisite guitar heroics that were required to sell hard rock and metal there. He made it a bit heavier. I mean, in actual fact, Still on That, at the very heavy track, it's virtually a metal track. And in all credit to Whitesnake, although they did tracks like Is This Love and Here I Go Again, they didn't shy away from making it more metal. The guitar parts on that track, I was just listening to the isolated guitar tracks, and it's a phenomenal performance. I spoke about it recently on another feature, where a guitarist just brings it all together with great riffing, great guitar parts, and a phenomenal solo. And the solo on that track is so short and sweet. Incidentally introducing the whammy bar, which he did use a lot, but obviously you'd see him with a Les Paul all the time. I don't know if I've ever seen him use a whammy bar live. Maybe some footage. But then he does that phenomenal alternate picked run that's just so ferocious, so accurate, so blistering. And then those high notes with that brilliant vibrato. But of course, he fell out with David Coverdale in that period, and by the time I saw the video, I was confused. I think I'd heard John Sykes had left, and I was like, well, that guy's that John Sykes. It looks a bit like it was Adrian Vandenberg. I recognised Vivian Campbell. He did the solo. I watched his fingers blistering up the fretboard, and it was all a bit strange, and as you go through, and in hindsight now, you realise what a huge part of that whole process Sykes was. And he never got to benefit from it, although he did financially, and I'll sort of come to that. Why I think we maybe didn't hear as much from him sometimes later on. The other interesting fact about that album is that It sold in the end, I think, 8 million copies in the United States and about 14 million worldwide. And if you actually look at that whole 80s era, I think that's the most album sales for one album by any guitarist. Obviously, Jakey Lee, I think he sold 3 million copies, Bark at the Moon, and 2 million with Ultimate Sin in the US. So there would have been other ones worldwide. Guys like Warren Martini, George Lynch were doing platinum. I think Double Martini had a triple platinum, a double platinum album. But those kind of numbers still don't reach what John Sykes achieved with the Whitesnake album. So I have all those 80s guys, and this includes Steve Vai, Satch, he had the biggest seller. Even Van Halen, apart from 1984, 10 million copies sold. Not sure how much that sold worldwide. Okay, we'll give Van Halen it. But Sykes, that's an amazing achievement, and introducing those really blistering shredding techniques to a wider audience. And I think people, because he left Whitesnake or was booted out, I think that kind of got overlooked and kind of got forgotten about. He wasn't able to capitalise on that. If he'd stayed in Whitesnake, he would have had the front covers of all those guitar magazines and would have been far bigger. The only interview I ever saw with him was when Blue Murder came out. It was an interesting feature, and he showed pictures of his guitar, some with whammies, I remember. And that was interesting. It was really exciting for me, which brings me to Blue Murder. So I remember that album getting a great 5-star review in Kerrang, and I was like, yeah, I love Sykes, I'm going straight to get that, and I was not disappointed. And that album came at a really important time in my life, as I was having my first forays into forming and being part of the formation of the first band I was in. And I was just listening to it all the time. I remember I took a train journey down to some relatives for a few days, and coming back, and I was in a train carriage. It was one of the old train carriages when we're still running those, and I was listening to the Blue Murder album, and the songs are just so great on that. It's kind of 1987 Part 2. It's the Whitesnake album that would have been, I suppose, great soloing on that, on tracks like Riot, Valley of the Kings, awesome riffing on a track like Ptolemy. That's an evil riff, and then a great sort of take on Cold Sweat Children of the Night on Black Hearted Woman, the last track. Massive bombastic production, amazing bass and drums as well. And of course, brilliant singing. I thought John Sykes had more than a good voice. He had a really good voice. The first time that was sort of showcased was on his solo single, was it Please Don't Leave Me? Don't quote me on that, but you actually find footage of that online. He does a lovely solo. So that was brilliant. And then Blue Murder, obviously, they went out and toured a bit, but, different times. And then I've got to admit, the next album just passed me by. I was in a period where I was kind of, although I was still playing music and listening to metal and stuff, I was a bit out of the loop, and it was very hard to find that album. I listened to it later on, and it's a good record. This is Nothing But Trouble I'm talking about. But it's not as good as the first one. It's got even more bombastic production, and it's quite harsh. I think doing everything himself probably led to elements of his perfectionism, and with music sometimes you just have to get it out there, particularly if you're doing it for a living. After that, he did solo albums. I'll just look at this here. I've got them here on my page. Out of My Tree 1995, Loveland 97, 20th Century 97. So 2 albums there. Loveland was all ballads, and then 20th Century was rockers, Nuclear Cowboy 2000. And that was his last studio album. I can't remember. Let's have a look when that came out. It just says 2000. It was released in Japan mainly. But quite interesting, that he didn't, from then until his death, there was some live stuff with a rebooted Thin Lizzy, which we'll come to. But that was his last studio recording. There were a couple of studio recordings issued on YouTube at the start of lockdown. It was a nice, exciting lockdown gift. And there was hope of some new Sykes material. I was like, go with Frontiers or something like that. It'd be perfect for him. But sadly, for whatever reason, it didn't need to happen. It didn't happen. Obviously now it won't. Maybe there's a possibility that stuff will come out. I was lucky enough to catch him live when he fronted a version of Thin Lizzy. Obviously it was a little controversial because people were like, well, Phil Lynnett's not there, he is Thin Lizzy. And what I'd say is I had a great night. It was great to see a show of Thin Lizzy stuff. It was Scott Gorham and him with 2 people who played with Phil Lynott, and they did a great set that covered all the classics, and had a bit of the thunder and lightning stuff, which I loved. I think Michael Lee was on drums, it was brilliant, and Marco Mendoza on bass. I went to the City Hall in Newcastle the next year to see it again. Actually, it wasn't Marco Mendoza on bass the first time, it was the second time. Tommy Aldridge on drums. Maybe not the right feel, but it was still a great show because people just wanted to hear those songs. And that carried on to 2-6. I think they had a bit of a bad gig, 2-6, 2-7, when they played with Deep Purple and Styx. This is in Newcastle, at the Newcastle Arena. They must have done other dates. And then he decided to finish that, and that was kind of the last we sort of heard of him, really, apart from these tracks he released online. One of my sort of theories is the White Snake, the 1987 album, was so successful and it got reissued, so on the one point it would have repurchases when it was remastered on CD. I think it was remastered in its 25th anniversary. It was remastered recently, CDs were pressed. This means, you'd get what's called mechanical copyright, and John Sykes, as one of the players on that, would receive that. And although that mechanical royalties don't play loads, with a big album like that, that would have given him a bit of cash. And then, of course, you've got the publishing money. He's a co-writer on Is This Love, which gets loads of radio plays, Still of the Night, and Give Me All Your Love. Not Here I Go Again, that's Bernie Marsden. So having those three tracks, and tracks like Bad Boys probably getting played as well, Crying in the Rain as well, obviously that's a Bernie Marsden one, but he certainly had 3 or 4 tracks that would go from getting a lot of radio plays on classic rock stations to, quite a few. And this is the sort of thing every year you're going to get a check. And this meant he didn't need to go out and work, I suspect. And so that motivation there would have been more musically led, and possibly his perfectionist nature kind of made a kind of paralysis about that. I don't know. He was supposed to do what became the Winery Dogs with Mike Portnoy and Billy Sheehan, but again, things got held up and they wanted to move forward, as people do, and they went with Richie Kotzen. So we'll just never know. But I think what we can assess, those albums he made in the 80s will stand as toe to toe with anything from that era. They're individual, they're unique. He's playing, although you can hear things like Gary Moore influence, it stands out uniquely because of his wide vibrato, his fucking go for broke style, his great writing. Of all those players, he's a great writer. But I think one of his interesting things I think he got to first was doing pinch harmonics on the lower strings. So obviously Zakk Wylde, I think it was an influence on Zakk Wylde, really kind of popularised that with Ozzy Osbourne in 88 onwards. But the first player to really kind of do that is John Sykes. If you listen to Cold Sweat, you get some low growls. It's quite a challenging technique to do low growl pinch harmonics because you need really high gain. It's easy to get them on the G string, which is a master as well. Remember that Cold Sweat, that first one. But he might have been doing them in the Tigers. The only other player from that era who I know was doing that, and he was another influence on us, was Ronnie LaTecro. But you're probably looking at the Knights of the New Thunder album, which is 1984. So John Sykes predates that. When I saw him live, Sykes, he was going mental with those low pinch harmonics. But the bloke was brilliant. He ticked all the boxes to me. And yeah, it's sad we don't have more material. But that's what I'd say to people, just start a Spellbound and just play through to Blue Murder. And, you've got all you need there. The guy left his mark there. Great player. Thanks for the great memories, the great soloing. If you've not heard John Sykes, check him out. We lost one of the greats of that era. Thanks very much. Remember, share and subscribe. And I'll see you again soon.